Adams throwing his full support behind a proposed mask ban on the subway and at protests.
People are using masks to commit crimes, to commit assaults. Cowards cover their faces.
Governor Kathy Hochul meant...
Wow, I don't think anybody saw this coming, but crime is rising so quickly in New York, not just in our subways, but in our streets and in our stores, that officials better do something to unmask our criminals so that we can figure out who they are. But as you can imagine, the idea of banning masks in New York is highly controversial.
Unmask them. That's the call today as an onslaught of protesters spew hatred from behind scarves and masks.
This following recent anti-Semitic incidents, including one where a man on the subway told any, quote, Zionists to get off the train.
When I see individuals on a subway being terrorized by individuals in masks, it's a cause for great concern.
Can you tell me why you cover your faces? Do you want to tell me what you think of Governor Hochul's mask ban?
People feel very empowered to say things that they wouldn't otherwise say when they're disguised.
Adams says that a mask ban will make it easier for the NYPD to identify offenders.
I agree. I think there's a lot of crime happening right now when people are wearing masks and you can't really see their faces, so I do agree with that.
Civil libertarians are opposed. The governor's concerns about masks disguising criminal activity won't be quelled by banning anonymous peaceful protests.
It is frightening to people. You're sitting on a subway train and someone puts on a mask like this and comes in. You don't know if they're going to be committing a crime.
The idea of a mask ban is now on the table, and it's got people here scratching their heads. Because although we're now hearing from progressives that this type of ban might be unconstitutional, what nobody's talking about is that New York could probably get a handle on its crime problem if it would ban crime instead of masks. But sadly, that's not on the table. And that's too bad, because dangerous assailants are ravaging our subway system, committing assaults and carrying dangerous weapons all over town. Plus, although protesters have already destroyed the colleges they've gone hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to attend, those protests have now left the colleges and are out here on our streets and in our trains, causing some people to wonder if masks are really the problem in New York, which has a shoplifting problem so bad that the illegal theft of products from drugstores and department stores now accounts for $4.4 billion of the state's economy. But here's the thing, the purse snatchers, the protesters, the shoplifters, they're all covering their faces. And the idea behind this ban is that if we could just see who these people are, they would see that it's not worth living a life of crime and they would never do a wrong thing ever again. Which is why the idea of a mask ban is now on the table, outraging not only career criminals, but also those who fear that in the internet age of cameras and viral videos, attending a protest could cause someone to lose everything they have. But the real reason this idea is now on the table is because our laws don't give authorities here any other choice. And right now, dangerous masked thugs are roaming the city thinking of which crimes they're gonna commit next. And they're all gonna escape scot-free with no consequences unless they can be identified, arrested. And then what, charged with misdemeanors because our laws protect criminals instead of punishing them? Some people say that's why we have a crime problem. Yet there's an incredible amount of support for this controversial idea of banning face coverings, and not for the reasons you might think. So here we are at the new school, and you can still see the police barricades out front, which just a couple of weeks ago were used to contain out-of-control protests that were happening here and at many of the colleges in this city. But even though these recent protests, and also those out on the streets, have been overrun with masked activists, what most people don't know is that wearing masks in New York used to be illegal for reasons that many of the protesters would probably agree with.
Unmask them. That's the call today as an onslaught of protesters spew hatred from behind scarves and masks. The protesters have taken to the streets in New York City and elsewhere, intimidating and threatening Jewish people.
Raise your hands if you're a Zionist! Raise your hands if you're a...
So as you can see, critics of New York's growing protest movement make the point that those who commit crime and do things that are wrong like to cover their faces so that no one can see who they are. And although the recent protests here were targeted at the state of Israel, there are anti-Semitic elements to them, which some say makes these protests just one massive movement of hate. And even though the situation in Gaza is a terrible humanitarian crisis, if you go back in American history, you'll see that hate groups of all persuasions have liked to cover their faces for some reason. Probably because it allows the haters to avoid cancel culture or responsibility for their actions while living normal lives as businessmen, doctors, nurses, teachers. But critics of this proposal point out how hypocritical it seems, especially here in New York, where just last summer when we had the Canadian wildfires, the governor gave 1 million masks out for free so that people could use them if they wanted to, and now they want to get rid of them? Seems kind of crazy. What if you still have your mask from last year that they gave you for free?
Many of the participants are wearing a mask or scarf, and when I approached them, they got camera shy. Can you tell me why you cover your faces? Do you want to tell me what you think of Governor Hochul's mask ban?
People feel very empowered to say things that they wouldn't otherwise say when they're disguised.
Okay, this makes sense. People who cover their faces have less to fear from their actions if those actions are filmed and then put out the internet because nobody knows that it was actually them. And the idea of protests being allowed to continue as long as they are maskless protests is a very interesting one, because it would mean that the only way to protest something would be to believe in it so much that you didn't care if your physical identity and face were connected to it. But that would be bad news for some of the protesters, because at Columbia University, the NYPD figured out that about half the people they arrested didn't even attend that school, and had their faces been on camera, they could have been spotted at all of the other protests all over town. It would have made this entire movement look a lot different had that been what was recorded. But at the exact same time, critics say that our society is so polarized now that even supporting legitimate causes is enough to get people canceled, have them lose their jobs, perhaps get dismissed from school, even when the cause is valid and just. But that's exactly why proponents of this ban say it's necessary, because after all, if hate is allowed to hide, how will we stamp it out as a society? But the problem seems to be that we don't really have a way figured out for people to be able to peaceably protest and assemble without fear and do that at the same time. Meanwhile, nobody in city leadership is behind the idea of actually arresting the people for the crimes they commit while they're wearing a mask or not wearing a mask. For example, those thugs on the subway looking for quote-unquote Zionists. Yes, what they did is awful, but that massive group of people got on a train which had no police on it, harassed everybody on the train, and they all walked away. None of them even got arrested or were identified. Isn't that the real problem? And why is it the city seems content to allow its citizenry to be intimidated? Well, to answer that question, we're gonna have to look at the other reason our leaders want face coverings banned, because sadly in this city, they're not just being used by protesters to hide from television cameras. Here we are in the New York City subway, and although there was one recent incident where masked intruders took over a train and started harassing people, the truth is that this place, the subway's been full of masked intruders running around down here doing absolutely horrible things, all getting away with it because the cameras we have aren't able to pick up who they are, which would lead potentially to a prosecution. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 cameras, all rendered useless by criminals who cover their faces.
Is it time to start banning masks in the subway as a way to fight crime? Governor Hochul thinks it is. When I see individuals on a subway being terrorized by individuals in masks, it's a cause for great concern. We have images.
Now look, anyone who's ever ridden the New York City subway will tell you that there have been times sketchy folks have been walking around down there who couldn't be identified, and when they harass you, as they've harassed me in the past because I've lived here for a while, it's frightening. There's no police, there's no security, and these people fear nothing because you don't know who they are. In fact, the only time you'll see any police in the subway is during morning rush hour when they're checking bags vigorously at some of the city's busiest stations, along with the presence of National Guard troops. Is it reassuring to see law enforcement in the train? Absolutely. But the sad reality is that that's not enough to keep the masked lunatics who are down here under control. And they don't just stay down there. They come from up here where they commit other crimes like shoplifting. They steal things and then they run into the train and get away, or they commit some other type of crime at street level and then go down. But all those might all be valid reasons for people not to wear masks down in the subway. What if someone wants to for a perfectly legitimate reason?
Many subway riders say it's really a tough call.
I agree. I think there's a lot of crime happening right now when people are wearing masks and you can't really see their faces, so I do agree with that.
Yeah, if you don't need it health reasons, you should probably take off the mask. It's unfortunate, but the criminals use it as a disguise. That's the problem.
You know something, isn't it interesting how every day regular people who have to ride the train and deal with whatever policy is inflicted upon them have the most logical views on a lot of this stuff? Nobody likes the idea of masked thugs riding the trains, robbing people, or masked protesters harassing commuters while hiding behind face coverings, but at the exact same time, there are people who for personal reasons want to cover their faces. And if you've ever ridden a packed subway train in the wintertime and heard everyone coughing and sneezing, you might have considered wearing one yourself. I don't care how for or against masks you are. New York's got a lot of interesting people out there, and if one of them has their face right here and they sneeze on you, you'll wish you were wearing one. But before we get into what the city's actions could look like on this, and if any type of mask ban is something we're going to experience in the near future, it's important to understand that this whole thing has many people confused. Because the challenge here is that we've got a crime problem, yet someone who's sick also has to take the train and get to their doctor's appointment, which means if there's action on this, it better be really clever and really smart, or it's not going to have any teeth to it.
previously banned masks for groups of 3 people or more under a law dating back to the 19th century, when upstate tenant farmers dressed as Native Americans and violently attacked landlords. The law was lifted.
Okay, I had no idea that was the thing, but it just goes to show you criminals have been concealing their identities for a lot longer than any of us have been alive. And there's sound logic from a law enforcement perspective on bringing back a 200-year-old rule. But the first problem with this rule is it doesn't ban all face coverings. If you were hoping it was going to do that, you're going to be disappointed, because it just bans the idea of face-covered groups marauding in public. These are groups of 3 or more, so the team of 2 or the solo lone wolf criminal who's out there stealing things and running around accosting people, it's not going to do anything to stop him. Now, the governor says this new idea won't apply to people who require a mask for personal reasons. And observers say it would probably be pretty hard to make the case that you were unwell, which is why you were wearing a face covering, but you also decided to attend a peaceful protest that decided not to become very peaceful. But what about the idea that infringing upon people's rights for how they behave in public is unconstitutional? Because that's what we're now hearing as a reason for why this ban won't stand.
The governor's concerns about masks disguising criminal activity won't be quelled by banning anonymous peaceful protests. And like other laws that criminalize people, they will be selectively enforced.
There is no constitutional right to hide one's identity while engaging in any...
Okay, so here's where this gets messy. It may not be constitutional for one to conceal their identity in public, but critics say any such ban is probably going to be selectively enforced, and they're right. We see it all the time in this city. The police get called to some horrible incident and they arrest somebody who was aggressive, somebody who was violent, somebody who attacked other people and most likely the police. And even though that person winds up arrested inside the back of the police car and is taken away, when it's time for that person to actually meet their fate, they get placed in front of a judge, the district attorney is there. Oftentimes the district attorney will either drop the charges or downgrade them to the point where they're just a misdemeanor and the person gets off without really any penalty. Yet the case is being made by multiple lawmakers that the idea of covering your face in public is just something not allowed. And also, what these lawmakers seem to be hinting at here is that this ban is not about stopping crime, even though they say it should do that.
Ban, yes, absolutely, do it. So what are we wasting time here for? You know, they're doing whatever they want to do, and we're sitting here, playing games.
Okay, so this new mask ban, it's not going to do anything about 1 or maybe 2 people who want to go into a store and start stealing things and run away, but what it is going to do is give the police an extra tool in their fight against protests, which seemingly pop up all over the place and are massive in size and scale. But there are some face coverings which have a religious purpose. What if somebody wants to wear one of those? What if they and other members of their group are in a big group? Is there something wrong with that? Because we have freedom of religion, that's going to be something that probably gets fought out in court if this were to ever happen. But the reality here is all the squabbling that's happening over this latest proposal, it's just beating around the bush that nobody wants to address. Because in New York City, where we've definitely got a crime problem, how are we going to solve it if all we're doing is looking for the root causes of crime? Because that's going to bring us to the idea that a face covering is the reason we have criminals, when in reality doing something to stop those criminals is probably a much better solution for everybody. That would preserve everyone's rights. What a novel concept that is. And if you want proof of this, look at what happened to the protesters who were arrested at Columbia University, many of whom got into hand-to-hand combat with police officers. Absolutely nothing. That's what our district attorney dropped all of the charges, citing lack of proof. Yes, that's right. All of those people who engaged in violence and destroyed their college, causing thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages, and did so much of it that graduation got canceled, all of them got a free pass. Now, the DA says there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute all of these people and likely get convictions, and he says that's because the cameras inside the buildings that the protesters had taken over were covered up by those very same protesters, which means nobody in this city thinks it's evidence that these are the same people who, even if they covered up the cameras, were still found inside that building after it had been occupied for weeks and were removed by the police and were aggressive about it when it happened. I guess that's not evidence, no? Observers say this is why we have a crime problem, and they say this is why banning the way people want to dress in public isn't going to have any effect on that, because criminals who get released when they do something wrong have every reason to go and do it again. They haven't learned their lesson. And that brings up a couple of big questions. Would we have a non-peaceful protest problem in this city if we punished non-peaceful protesters? Would we have a shoplifting problem in this city if we punished shoplifters? And what about thugs roaming the subway, doing things things that are wrong. Would we have a problem with them if they were all in jail? Probably not. And you know what? It wouldn't matter if those people were wearing a mask or not, because they'd be in jail where they can wear whatever the prison attire is. What do you think about that? Is that true? Is that how we solve crime? Or is a ban like this the only thing New York City can do because our officials' hands are tied? Let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.